Welcome back to the Nebraska Furniture Mart Locker Room Show, where I'm joined now by Breland Moore and Jared Kohler for tonight's Roundtable. All right, guys, fingers crossed that sports will in fact return in the coming weeks, which means brand new sports moments for all of us to enjoy. But you know what? As we wait, let's take a look back at a few sports moments that maybe don't get the love that they really deserve. So in your opinion, what's the most underrated Kansas City sports moment? It can be recent. It can be way back in history. Jared, I'll let you go first.
I think the wild card game in 2014 is properly regarded as the night baseball came alive in Kansas City. It's the greatest game I've ever seen, but I think people forget what immediately happened after, because the Royals went west, faced a 100-win Angels team, and if they lose both those road games and are eliminated from the playoffs, I think we look at the wild card game more as a fluke rather than the start of something special. But instead, they go out and win not just thrilling games, but it's the way in which they won. Let's think back. Game 1, Mike Moustakas extra inning game-winning home run. Now, we all know Moose went on to set the Royals franchise record for single-season home runs, but back in 2014, Moustakas was actually sent down to the minors a couple months before. He hit barely over 200 in the regular season, and he was pinch hit for in the wild card game. He was not a threat at that time, so that home run was really a shocking moment. Then the very next night, Game 2, extra innings, Eric Hosmer game-winning home run. So the Royals win both games in thrilling fashion, but the two guys that did it, Hos and Moose, the cornerstones of the franchise. They were drafted a year apart, best friends, one in the minors. But in the bigs, they really had disappointed to that point in the regular season. But in the playoffs, they come alive and carry the team to victory. Of course, the Royals go on to sweep their way to the World Series. And I think when looking back at the glory years of the Royals, you think of the wild card game and the World Series and the Astros comeback. But that Angels series, I think, is very underrated, not just because it's thrilling, but I think how significant they were, because they weren't just wins. The fact that it really jump-started Royals Hall of Fame careers for Hosmer and Moustakas.
Yeah, and everyone's going to remember the Mike Moustakas breaking of the home run record for the Royals, but I do think an underrated name that a lot of people didn't realize was going to break that record was Jorge Soler last year. I think it was kind of not as recognized because he wasn't as big of a name for the franchise, and they were having a terrible season. But Breland, your moment is probably going to have to be a little bit more recent.
Remember, I got here in September, so I don't have a ton to go off of, but I think the first time I was in the locker room when the Chiefs went 4-0, right? And I remember having this moment with LaShawn McCoy. Keep in mind, we both came from Buffalo together after spending so many years of that playoff cycle, or lack thereof, rather. I remember looking at LaShawn McCoy and I was like, LaShawn, when was the last time you were 4-0? And he's like, man, when was the last time you covered a team that was 4-0, girl? Like, this is insane. And I think, it really felt business as usual in that locker room. Like, yeah, no big deal. And same thing for the fans. Yeah, no big deal. This is just normal. But when you take a step out and you look at this market with fresh eyes, I think you really appreciate how underrated that was. Teams would kill to be 4-0 to start the season, and here it's just average. So I think just the fact that just managed to slide right on under is just the end-all be-all, most underrated moment that LaShawn and I could recognize, but apparently no one else really seemed to think anything of it.
Well, I think my underrated sports moments are actually very, very sad moments, and I know a lot of Chiefs fans are just going to lose their breath, feel like they get punched in the gut, because I think the last two playoff losses with Alex Smith at the helm, the one against Pittsburgh and then the one against the Tennessee Titans, were the most underrated in my opinion, because both of them signaled a change that needed to happen within the Chiefs organization. And although they had Alex Smith as their quarterback, and they thought that he was a guy that could change and turn this team around, which in my opinion he did, but he wasn't the final piece that they needed. It was Patrick Mahomes. And so I go back and I look especially at that Tennessee Titans loss in the playoffs, how upset everyone inside that locker room was. I remember after the game, none of the players would talk to me, so I literally had to go and interview other people that I worked with for the radio network to recap the game, because none of the guys wanted to talk to you. It literally felt like someone had died, because they knew that they had blown their chance. They knew that this signaled the beginning of a new era, both bad and good. For a lot of those guys, it meant they were going to have to leave. For a lot of the Chiefs fans and the organization meant they were going to need to bring new guys in. So I thought that was probably two of the biggest moments, and they're very underrated because then it signaled the Patrick Mahomes era and the changes, and it gave a lot of those coaches and even Clark Hunt and Mark Donovan the guts to be like, okay, we've got to make a change because this cannot keep happening over and over and over again in the playoffs, because our fan base, they've been so loyal for so long, and they have seriously cried over these playoff losses because you thought you had such a good team, but it just never all came together. Finally, that gave them the guts to move forward, make changes, because that was the absolute right thing to do, and it was perfect timing.